Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean Cohen. I'm the Executive Officer of the South Bay Labor Council, and it's an honor to be with you this morning. All of us are here because we love Fred Hirsch, because we've been inspired by Fred, because we've learned by Fred, because we've been scolded by Fred to be better, and because we know that we are all here to do important work on behalf of working people. Today, we're honored to be joined by friends and family of Fred, and we have a program that's going to have a few components. We have some live music from the AFM Local 6 musicians. We have some guest speakers, and then we're going to be able to open up the room for folks who want to share stories and talk about Fred so everybody can have the opportunity to remember and to share. So we're going to move right into the program. We have almost 140 people on this Zoom, which is just, I think, a small fraction of the people that Fred has touched or who Fred has taught and who Fred has fought with. And we are so pleased that you're here with us today. So we will pass this on to the musicians to start us off. You guys are on mute. Oh, no. Manuel, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
Oh, Lori Hirsch. Okay, here she is.
They're playing De Colores. We cannot hear.
De Colores.
What a shame.
The host can unmute everyone so we can all hear.
Just unmute the musicians, not everyone.
You have the ability, Gene, to find his name and unmute him.
That'll work.
La gallina con el cara, 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 cara. Los pollitos con el pío, 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 pío. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. So, all right, this next number I'm sure everybody knows. So we invite you to sing along. Don't be shy. Here we go. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong.
All right.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshop, endless mouths of freight we played. Now how we stand outcast and start miss the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever.
Oye, están usando la misma pieza que usé yo en el video. Pero no mira nada.
No, mira.
Se conecte. I had to call my own phone, so
A ver, ¿qué canción es esa?
no se oye nada. No me dice conecte. I have no idea.
Oye, si tú puedes cantar eso.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. We really appreciate the musicians who, of course, are union musicians joining together today to honor Fred and to share that music with us. Right now, we're going to hear from some speakers who have known Fred in different parts of his life. And I'd like to call first on Supervisor Cindy Chavez, who's joined us today.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, everyone. It's so good to see all of these old friends and family to honor, someone who was so important to Mike and I and to our family, and I know to all of yours. I thought I would just start by telling a story of when I very first got to the Labor Council, and this was literally 100 years ago. And I'll speak a little bit on behalf of those who got to be the Chief Executive Officer and working with Fred. So Amy Dean at the time was the head of the Labor Council, and we had gone on a trip to one of the national conferences, and we were in line to say hello to a whole bunch of dignitaries. And at the time, Lane Kirkland was the head of the labor movement, and Amy and I walked up to him and introduced ourselves, and Amy said, we're from the South Bay Labor Council. And he looked at us and he had this really, I would say, unpleasant expression on his face. And he said, "You're the Labor Council with your own foreign policy." And Amy grabbed me and pinched me by the arm, and she's like, "He's talking about Fred Hirsch." And how Fred helped us think, differently than the rest of the labor movement about war and about the world, the role that workers played in the really building war machines and helping us think differently about our relationships with labor leaders around the globe. And it made me think of two other quick stories I wanted to share. One was that to know Fred was to love him, to argue with him, and to really think and dream about the future with him. But he was very practical, very, very pragmatic in many ways, and very dreamy in others. And I remember a long, long time ago, and actually Steve Preminger reminded me of this, that as the labor movement was continuing to evolve, he played a really big role in helping his union, the plumbers, think about their role in particular. And I remember that when he and Lloyd got together on an item or an issue, they were really unstoppable. And one of those was really fighting for children's health insurance. And I just want to remind everybody that Fred, the labor movement fought for those things. The leading unions were 393 under Lloyd and Fred, and all of their members had health insurance. They were fighting for other workers. And that just, again, speaks to Fred and his just incredible ability to love other people, even at the same time while he was scolding us. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and this is just something I've reflected on a lot, is that, we in the labor movement have been blessed with a lot of really important leaders, and many who have passed. And I've been thinking a lot about them. And, one thing that I just want to say that will stay in my heart about Fred is that he had the ability to be enormously visionary and still work in the moment. And I think that's why he worked on so many campaigns. I think it was why he was on so many picket lines. I think he really understood that balance. And I just want to say to his family, I know how much he loved you, because he talked about you all the time. And thank you for sharing Fred with all of us. And thanks for letting me be part of this celebration today. He will be deeply missed.
Thank you, Cindy. Next, we'd like to call on Chava Bustamante to share some words. Chava, can you hear us? Okay, we'll have Chava speak next.
I got it. I
Oh,
got
here we
it.
go. Thank
Can
you.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. Well, again, good morning, everyone. I would like to express my deepest condolences to Fred's family. I'm very sorry for your loss and for the passing of our dearest compañero, Comandante Fred Hirsch. When Jean called me to ask if I could say a few words to honor Fred, I was very proud, but at the same time, I got nervous because speaking in public is something that always makes me very anxious. Yet, here I am because my love for Fred is greater than any feeling of inadequacy that I could feel. I met Fred in the early 90s during the Justice for Janitors campaign. I do not remember how many times he marched with us, how many times we got arrested together, or all the times he supported our actions to guarantee that cleaning workers could have a union and earn the right to bargain for better wages and decent working conditions and benefits. Rain or shine, Fred was always present, ready to support the workers' struggle for a better life. But Fred's activism was not limited to supporting union organizing drives or contract campaigns. He challenged the labor movement to go beyond its members' self-interest. His sense of solidarity and his leadership included getting involved in any cause where justice was on the line. His leadership and courage was an inspiration when we organized the largest immigration protest in the history of San Jose in 2006. He was there in the fight for tenants' rights, against police brutality, for people in Central America. Hold on one second. And countless other fights for equality and justice. Towards the end of my career as a farm worker, lechuguero in Salinas in 1979, 1980, a friend of mine gave me a copy of The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. That book changed my life and my perception of the world and my role in it. Fred's way of living his principles always reminded me of Tom Joad, the protagonist of that novel. In the book, Tom is introduced as someone who dedicates his time and energy to the present moment. The future, which seems illusory and beyond his grasp, does not concern him. But later in the book, he undergoes the most significant transformation as he casts his seize the day philosophy. He realizes that he cannot remain a silent witness to the injustices of the world. He cannot work for the welfare of his own family if it means taking bread from another family. And so, Tom abandons the life of private thought and that structures the lives of most of the male characters in the novel and in real life, and heads for public course of action. I don't really know when or how, but I'm certain Fred, at some point of his life, reached the same conclusion Tom Joad reaches in the book. He knew that he could not be a silent witness to the injustices of the world, and instead became a fighter for justice. He led by example. He challenged many of us to evaluate and reevaluate our decisions and our positions. He acted as the conscience of the labor movement. He fought injustice until he could fight no more. This morning, as we gather to honor his memory, the dialogue that Tom Joad and his mother have in the moment of their final farewells comes to my mind as I wonder, where are you, Fred? How will I know about you? In the novel, Tom laughs uneasily when his mother asks these questions and says to her, well, Maybe a guy doesn't have a soul of his own, but a piece of a big one. And then it doesn't matter. Then I'll be in the dark. I will be anywhere, wherever you look. Wherever there is a fight for hungry people to eat, I will be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I will be there. I will be in the way kids scream when they are angry, and the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know dinner is ready. And when our people eat the things they grow and live in the houses they build, I will be there. And so today, more than ever, I know that wherever there is a fight of hungry people to eat, Fred will be there. And if I am there too, following his example,
Camera's not working here for me.
Fred will be with me in my heart and in my thoughts. Que viva Fred Hirsch. Thank you.
Thank you, Chava. Thank you to everyone for your grace as we manage Zoom. So I just want to take a point of personal privilege to say that I've known Fred for over 30 years. So when I was a kid, I was on the picket line, and to me, he was just this interesting fellow that I was curious about. But about 5 years ago, I was given the privilege and honor to work for Local 393. And I see many of my brothers and sisters on the Zoom here today. And what I learned is that many organizations have a DNA to them, and that 393 has a unique DNA. It believes in militant organizing for its members, but it's also really rooted in dignity and compassion for others. And I saw that demonstrated in Fred, and I saw that demonstrated in all of the members of Local 393. So I'd like to invite Paul Aller, who is a mentor to many people and who is a wonderful and deep friend of Fred, to share some words from 393's family and from Paul. So thank you very much, Paul. You're on mute, Paul.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. It's been my honor to have known Fred for over 30 years. I met Fred when I was a business representative in Bakersfield, California, Local 460. First time I'd met Fred was at a California State Pipe Trades meeting, and I just fell in love with the guy the first time I met him. I mean, he was speaking, trying to get a couple of cents from the California State Pipe Trades from some little country in Africa that nobody had ever even heard of. But that day, he spoke graciously, and he really put his story forward. But that day, I'm sorry to say, he didn't get his 2 cents. Later on, when I moved to San Jose and became a member of San Jose, and the first time I ran for office in San Jose, Fred come up to me and he told me, he says, you know, I've known you now for about 10 years and you've always been honest and forthright, and I would definitely support you. And I believe Fred's support probably got me a number of votes that year. Fred was one of the finest men I've ever met in my life, and I loved him dearly. He will be missed by everyone in our local union and the Labor Council in general. I mean, I was with Fred when we all walked downtown. Every movement that was made that Fred was involved with, I was involved with myself in Local 393. And I dearly miss the brothers and sisters of my local union. I'm living in Knoxville, Tennessee now, and haven't really had an opportunity because of the virus to meet a lot of people, but Fred will be in my heart till the day I die. And I loved him dearly. He taught us all the labor movement from the bottom side up, and he will always be remembered by me and in my household forever. And I don't know what we're going to do to get a replacement for Fred, because in actuality, Fred could never be replaced. We had a guy in Bakersfield, his name was White, Mr. White, and he had the same resolve as Fred did. And Fred said, you know, one time he says, you know, all politicians are son of a bitches. He said, but the thing of it is, they have to be our son of a bitch to make it work. And I agree with Fred totally on that. I mean, we've met some great people in politics and some lowlife people in politics, but Fred could pinpoint everyone just by the way they treated everybody else, because that's what it's all about, is treating each other equally. And Fred was one of those guys. I don't know of anybody that disliked Fred. If they did, I'm sorry for them, because they didn't know him as well as the rest of us, I guess. I will love Fred till to my end days. And I wish I could say more about Fred, but I don't have hours. I don't have hours. And I want to give everybody an opportunity to speak. And I appreciate Gene letting me know when Fred passed. I'm sort of out of the loop now, but Gene keeps me informed and asked me if I would speak. And I'm so proud to have been a friend of Fred's. And God bless him, and God bless you all. Thank you very much, Gene.
Thank you so much, Paul. When Fred passed, there was a great groundswell to make sure that we had an opportunity to have space to talk about Fred and to mourn Fred and to plan our next actions around what Fred's expectations would be for us. And fortunately, we had the blessing of the support of his family. And so it's been a real pleasure to be able to have conversations with Liza and to communicate with Sasha. And so we're so grateful and appreciative, not only of your willingness to share Fred with us, but to be here today. So Sasha, thank you for joining us.
Hey, can you all hear me? All right. Hey, it's such an honor to be here. And I, it's really powerful to see all these faces here and to see everyone thinking about Grandpa. So Fred Hirsch was my grandpa starting in the mid '80s. His daughter Liza married my father Paul when I was a kid, and he and Jenny were my grandparents. You know, like I grew up in New York City. They were in Santa Cruz by the time that I you know, was came around the family. And what I just want to get across is that Fred left a huge, really positive mark on my life, because he and Ginny both really helped me understand what it meant to be an internationalist and to see things from a perspective of we're not just Americans here, but we're connected to struggles around the world. And from the time that I was, you know, a young teenager and trying to make my way in the world, like Fred and Ginny were sitting there telling me stories about Angela Davis's trial. And, you know, Fred, that man had stories, you know, he had gone down to be with the Black Panthers and learned how they were doing their community patrols, and then come back to San Jose, and they had instituted community. They were like following the police around to make sure that they weren't abusing their neighbors. And all of that was incredibly meaningful for me as a young man trying to make my way in the world. And Fred and I fought a lot. You know, it's like really, after someone dies, it's really nice to be like, oh yeah, he was such a great man, everyone loved him. I don't know if that's true, if everyone loved Fred. I think actually he, you know, that guy was a fighter, and he like fought, you know, and he would, if you got on his bad side, he would tell you, he would be, you know, all up in your face about the issues he had with you. But I feel really lucky that he was my grandpa. And when I went back to social work school a few years ago, I ended up writing a paper about him. And I'm going to read you this paragraph. I had the chance to interview him, and I'm going to read you something that he wrote to me. He said, "Sasha, most of what this is after me, I interviewed him. He told me all these amazing stories about growing up like a Jewish kid in New York City and fighting with the Catholic kids and like just be like the Peekskill riots and meeting grandma and like all like the union fights and the civil rights struggles and all, like, you know, grandpa was like a badass, you know, he was like an internationalist. He was an anti-racist. He was an anti-fascist, you know. And so what he says to me is, Sasha, most of what I have described to you has kept me from being an adequate father when our daughters were young. It has made me a somewhat distracted lover when I should have shown my love. It is, excuse me, it has kept me from going fishing and rocking around on the sea as a good man should. It has distracted me from writing the great novel of our time. It has kept me from taking on the political mantle where I might use the public megaphone of a city council, county board of supervisors, state assembly, or Congress. But it has kept me from working at my trade full time, making a good living and feathering my nest. But all in all, I've probably done what I do best. I'm happy and feel I've done what I might to fight the good fight and generate a good measure of working class love, power, and light. So there you go. That's Fred Hirsch. We love him. That's it.
Thank you, Sasha. That was beautiful.
Lovely.
Next, I'd like to welcome Father John Pedigo to share some words about Fred.
Thank you, Sasha. I knew Fred from, I guess, ever since I became a priest. So I think it's kind of funny here. Fred, an avowed communist, not the biggest believer in God, but he believed in human beings. And so it was kind of funny. It's like, he asked me to speak at, priest at his a communist setting. But I just want to say that's the kind of guy that Fred was. He was not just an internationalist, he was an interhumanist. In the best sense and the really the only sense of the word, that Fred was, he was a teacher to me. Back in 1993, I think it was down when I did my first march from Morgan Hill to San Jose. It was the first march that we did, and there was a labor meeting up in San Jose, and people are kind of upset about what's going on 187, and he just him and some of the other people saying, yeah, we should do something, in it. So I left that meeting, went down to Morgan Hill, was really, really furious, and says, well, where the hell is the church on this thing? And so we got people from the church, and we did a march from Morgan Hill into San Jose, downtown San Jose, and then the labor movement consequently was building their marches from their communities all throughout East Side San Jose, Center San Jose, and they were all going to meet people that were marching 22 miles from Morgan Hill into downtown San Jose. And Fred was part of that kind of a group of people, and just sort of like, it was really amazing. There was thousands of people. There was the first time we did, that was the first like real immigrant rights march, mass mobilization of folks in Santa Clara County. And Fred was a part of that, and he was kind of an instigator. And so he's been an instigator to me throughout all the rallies and all the marches. But what Fred has taught me is that at the center of all the struggle, and why he appears all over the place, he's kind of like Elijah. He just sort of shows up everywhere, right? For Fred said the most important thing is like, what is that, the poor man, the poor woman, the poor individual, what is that person experiencing? What's that common oppression? And so he's teaching me to kind of like hear that story, understand that it's not the strategies, it's not the kind of politics, it's the person, the individual who is suffering under this mantle of systemic stuff. And so all we can do is show up everywhere. So when we were arrested at in Historian King for, I forget what it was, some kind of a grocery march or something. I don't know what the hell it was, but he was like there, and he was there with a few of us that were going to do this deliberate thing, stopping traffic in the middle of King and Story. He was there. We were kind of arrested at the same time. Fred was there. The immigrant rights march, as Chavez said, Fred was there. At every single labor meeting and the interfaith meeting. Even though Fred didn't specifically profess, wasn't part of a shul, he wasn't part of any particular religious kind of formal religious thing, but he did see the importance of having the faith community there. And so I speak, not for everybody in the faith community, but it was Fred that understood the work of liberation. Because if one person is free, we're all free. And unless every person on this planet is free, including the planet itself, we can never truly be free. Fred lived that. And that's why he showed up in every damn march, why he was at every single thing, because he saw this as a movement to liberation. And there were very specific contract concerns he was involved in. And there's things that had absolutely no contracts attached to them, such as, stopping the war. I mean, we were there, back when we were trying to stop the war in Iraq the first time when I was a seminarian. He was part of that whole movement. Father Bill Leninger and Father Monsignor Boyle, these guys, introduced me. One of the first people they introduced me to was Fred. So all my mentors, all the people I knew were connected to Fred. And if you wanted to understand the integrity of this movement that Fred was a part of, you need to kind of know Fred as a person. I regret not knowing him as well as obviously some of you guys have done. I cannot imagine what sacrifices that Fred had to make in terms of his family to be so well read, to know so many people, to be the kind of person that can network people together, that could remember your name, and that could treat the person who didn't have anything other than a name tag on their shirt, and to treat that person equally dignified as he would with any political official. That Fred saw the human being. He was a real mensch, a real human being, to truly live it out. So thanks, Fred, for the inspiration. Thank you, Fred, for showing us how we're all tied together in a common movement of liberation. Fred, for helping me be part of this amazing labor movement in the South Bay and seeing our common humanity. Thank you, Fred. Fred, you will be missed.
Thank you, Father John. Our next speaker is Liza Hirsch Medina, Fred's daughter. Can you hear us, Liza?
I'm sorry.
No, no, perfect.
I apologize. I didn't realize I was muted. Okay. Oh, I should start again, I gather. Sorry. Anyway, what I was saying is that the fog of grief that descended when our father died made me hesitate to try to speak today. I'm not so at ease doing that either. But since that father was Fred Hirsch, we all know he just scoffed and said, just come on, get the hell out there and do it. So at the very least, I want to make sure to thank all of you on behalf of our family for making this event happen, because although he would scoff at it too, he would be proud of our respect for him and certainly honored by the presence of all of you. You haven't heard or seen much of him for the past 4 or so years since Alzheimer's disease and then several strokes sidelined him. But except for the 2 harrowing weeks in the hospital, he continued to enjoy life until the night he departed. That is due mainly to the love and care that Marcia Bertholf, first a family friend of ours since the 60s, lavished on him since they re-met and fell in love a few years after my mother, Ginny Hirsch's death in 2003. Fred and Marcia made a wonderful life together. But I can tell you in the last few years, they both missed all of you. The Pollyanna idea occurred to us more than once that if there could ever be an apt time for Fred to be unable to fully take in and parse what is going on in this country, the reign of Trump was it. I haven't lived in San Jose since 1971, but my father's urge to communicate and the urgency with which he approached everything he did kept me almost in blow-by-blow touch with his activities during many of the ensuing years, sharing and asking for feedback on nearly every missive, letter, resolution, leaflet, or speech he produced. So I feel like I know some of you through your friendship and work with him, which he would recount in great detail because literally it meant the world to him. Some of being Fred and Ginny's offspring was funny and could also be embarrassing, like being picked up from Horace Mann's school on his Vespa to be his bird dog for a precinct or two, walking a couple of houses ahead of him to distribute all the literature and find out who might want to register, then marking the sidewalk with chalk where someone wanted to, and then nonpartisan voter registrar Fred would sign them up. Or explaining in school constantly why in our family we would not stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance every day until its words came true. Our art activities, we colored a lot of picket signs in with the letters, the black letters that adults had made, and tortured Fred by squeaking the magic markers on the poster board. We also had memorable treats like discovering the then brand new House of Bagels on Geary Street in San Francisco after a rainy demonstration in 1962 and making it a hoped for reward on the way home from the city every time we went, or picking up tamales at the Guadalajara market, watching Lou of Lou's Donuts on Santa Clara Street all by himself for years and years, deftly turn out trays of gooey goodies. Meeting us after a walkout to support Patty Brito in, I think, 1966 or 67. Fred met us across the street and taught the proprietor of Hillcrest Creamery right across the street from Roosevelt Junior High how to make egg creams. And on a free weekend day, maybe we'd go to Alum Rock Park and look for tarantulas, or to the flea market where once we found and Fred loudly reclaimed a bike he had fixed up for me that I allowed to be stolen. Daily life in our family was pretty unusual. Our house was a raucous, messy hub of activity with an offset press, printing leaflets in the garage, frequent unexpected dinner and overnight guests, some of whom stayed for months. A lot of rushing daily to design and print leaflets and then get to the meetings and demonstrations that they advertised. Not to mention my parents' full-time jobs, 3 daughters, a couple of cats, and a dog. We had a lot of chores. The background music was Harry Belafonte, Paul Robeson, Woody Guthrie, the Weavers, Agustin Lira, and Danny Valdez's high school garage band playing Gloria incessantly on the other side of the fence our backyard shared until Fred hollered threats at them. We never had money, but we were fantastically rich in people, and we never wanted for anything either. Going to Delano and meeting Caesar and Helen Chavez during the first weekend of the grape strike in 1965 didn't happen to many people, but it changed our lives forever, even though the lifetime commitment to the union I'd hoped for was cut short in the late 70s. I was the B-flat blonde little girl lent by Fred to ride in a fancy convertible with the also blonde but childless Don Edwards and his wife Clyda during his first congressional campaign. How many kids get to help host the likes of John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer, or meet Dig Gregory and Ed Asner? Decades later, visiting with us during my husband Eliseo's fast for family on the Capitol grounds in 2013, John Lewis remembered staying the night at our house more than 50 years before while recruiting SNCC volunteers for Freedom Summer. I was amazed and touched that he remembered. Of course, it was memorable to him, Congressman Lewis explained, because it was his first trip as far away as California. and one of the first white people's houses he ever stayed in. Some of it is a blur to me. For being my parents' kid, I've been workaholicing myself since I left home. And even before that, I spent as much time in Delano as I could, remaining there after my parents returned to San Jose. Also, by the way, father secretly getting Catholic, something which I kept secret from my father. But one part of Fred's contribution to the movement in San Jose stands out, extraordinary in itself, and because it was the subject of our last really meaty discussion. Back in San Jose in the summer of 1968, Fred spurred the development of the Community Alert Patrol, as Sasha mentioned, an organization that I think principally he and Sophie Mendoza first founded. CAP was a highly organized community activity that dispatched several cars full of Black, brown, and white observers linked by CB radio to a base provided by Father Moriarty at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, where two people listened to the police radio and then sent CAP patrols to observe and document police stops all over downtown and the East Side, so that they would be less likely to end in the circumstances that the Black Lives Matter movement exists today still to combat. In 2017, during one of the waves of very effective and widespread Black Lives Matter demonstrations, he talked about CAP and he pointed out its clear trajectory to the BLM movement. He lamented that CAP's high maintenance activities weren't sustained for as many years as he'd hoped. But he also realized that if it weren't for CAP and other such projects which were based on Black Panther programs, that there would not be body cams today or nearly the breadth of awareness of the wholesale racism and brutality doled out to Black and brown communities by the police then and now. Fred's work in all the years since then is legendary, and I think others of you can speak to it better than I. He was always a dedicated union and labor council activist, always. He loved his local, but his range was even greater than that. After the UFW and CAP, Fred and Ginny worked with the Chilenos who had supported the assassinated Salvador Allende and fled to San Jose as refugees, and then connecting the local labor movement with the human rights and labor movements in Mexico and Latin America. He organized and wrote tirelessly. And just as he would bellow out lines from the song, "I ain't gonna study war no more," his anti-war and anti-imperialist stance was always pronounced. Fred had a strong body, a deep, powerful voice, and a dedicated, disciplined mind. He could be fierce, loud, demanding, demeaning, impatient, but he always subjected himself to even more pressure than he ever applied to the rest of us. He could also be hilarious, loving, a little gullible, and extremely ticklish. And what only a handful of us experienced was his poetic talent, mostly for limericks, which he would weave into slogans, jingles, and lighthearted messages of gratitude and affection. My sisters and I, Sasha, his beloved grandson, Sam, who's now 32 and couldn't be with us today. He got to be the son Fred wanted but never had. We told him often that we loved him, but I don't think we thanked him enough for all that he gave us. So I will do that now. Thank you, Dad, from all of us. And thank all of you too for your work with him and your support of Fred and our family.
Thank you, Liza.
Marcia.
Marcia, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your tribute to Fred. I'm sure he's listening. right now, and he's honored that you spoke so highly of him. He truly loved 393. When COVID first started, he could never remember we were in a pandemic, but he always remembered there was a union meeting on the second Wednesday, even though there wasn't. But I drove him every second Wednesday down to the 393 hall. And then we drove back and he felt better. We both loved going to the conventions, me for the friendship and him for being able to bring up fair wages, working conditions, and other just causes. Nancy, I really want to thank you for being so kind to Fred. You drove him home so many times after the meetings. And then after that wasn't feasible anymore, I drove him to all the meetings we could. And I just really want to thank you all for your love and understanding and honor for Fred. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for showing all of us what love in action means every day. Our next speaker is Sal Ventura.
Hi, everybody. I have a real hard time with this. There's other things going on, but I've spoken previously about Fred and our relationship and how much I loved him and how much he was half of my moral compass in the labor movement. Losing him is a big loss to me, even though I'm not that active in the labor movement as I was before. But let me express to Liza and Leslie and Lori, his daughters, how much he meant to me, how he mentored me and helped me become the man that I am. And to his grandkids, especially to Sam. Sam is one of the grandkids that I've met. When Fred and Ginny used to come to Western Workers Labor Heritage Festival, which is a festival that I was part of. And when Ginny passed away, Sam would come with Fred to the festival, usually with a skateboard. But to his grandkids, your grandfather was a great man in so many ways. And to Marcia, thank you for bringing him to my retirement party, and thank you for driving him to those meetings, and thank you for being a partner that was loving and caring. And for all of you, I feel your loss. As you know, back in the day when Reagan was in office, there used to be an organization called, there used to be a news publication called Hard Hat News, which is basically rank and file building trades members around the Bay Area who got together to organize, to fight the leadership in our unions who we thought were not doing their jobs. And we'd go to meetings in Oakland and San Francisco and in San Mateo County, Alameda County, and Fred was usually there. And I was usually going with my other mentor, Jay James. But when Fred got up and spoke, oftentimes, or wanted to have some course of action, oftentimes I was very uncomfortable with it. He, a brave man and courageous in so many ways, but a lot of stuff, some of the stuff they want to do with, I didn't have the same courage that he had. But when I thought of, and sometimes I didn't agree with him, but always I would look at it morally, whether it's a social issue, a labor issue, human rights issue. Was he right? Morally, was he right? And every single time that I thought about that, Fred was right. He was, in the best sense of the word, of the two words, a mechanic in his trade, and an organizer in the labor movement, in the social justice movement, etc. You know, we shared some heroes in labor unions. We shared idols like Joe Hill and Mother Jones. We also shared in the social movement or otherwise Paul Robeson and Martin Luther King Jr. And, you know, Fred had so many talents. He was a writer. He was an organizer. He was just so many things. And he was part of a book called The Cold War Against Labor. Fred, along with Virginia Muir, had a big excerpt in this book. And you can get it on Amazon. He was also author of a book, The CIA and the Labor Movement. But I want to read an excerpt because this is who Fred is. If I can do it real very quickly with glasses. Fred Hirsch. I'm a union plumber in San Jose, California. Right after the 1973 coup in Chile, I became interested in what U.S. unions were doing in Latin America. Because of events in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and almost every country in the news south of the border, my interest, call it curiosity, is ever more intense. I was propelled into action by the terrible crimes and suffering leveled against the Chilean workers in 1973 for having elected a president who opened a door towards self-determination and socialism. I helped organize a local committee in solidarity with Chile. Because I was on the bench, which means on the books or out of work, and had some time to kill, our labor subcommittee gave me the task of assembling a packet to prod our Central Labor Council into action. The job meant researching information that was brand new to me and startling to all union people who looked at it carefully. We had shared the notion that U.S. labor had a policy of solidarity with workers who were hurting abroad. We found the very opposite, a world of betrayal. We just couldn't believe it. As a plumber, I'm primarily a mechanic. Things have got to fit together. We lay out a job, take our measurements, cut and fit together, or cut and fit the material, and if it doesn't work out, we're down the road and back on the bench. We can't get away with covering up misdeeds with rhetoric. Neither should officials of the AFL-CIO. In looking at Chile, I found that any concept of solidarity was at odds with the work of the AFL-CIO arm in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this branch was called the American Institute for Free Labor Development, or IFELD. In effect, their measurements were all cut to fit the needs of the companies and government officials that inflicted unspeakable suffering on the workers. I had to remeasure. Something was drastically wrong. If the AFL-CIO was part of the betrayal, why? And why didn't union people here seem to know anything about the IFELD's impact on workers in Chile and in other countries? I learned from books and from interviews with a few remarkable people. I discovered that the AFL-CIO has been involved in the disruption of Latin American labor movements. This has been done not by our members, but by certain top officials in concert with corporate America and government agencies. I learned that the transnational corporations manipulate our government and our unions to serve their commercial interests and to control workers in Latin America. That's how my investigation began. So for a fair weather guy like me, these are some serious words and accusations. But you know, the last part of this excerpt, I'll do the last paragraph. And by the way, the title of this contribution that Fred had was "A Plumber Gets Curious About Exporting McCarthyism," and that will be explained next. The CFR clique in the AFL-CIO lays claim to the words pluralism, democracy, and free trade unionism, but it was anti-communism which put them in bed with the transnational bosses. It is anti-communism which keeps them there, dividing workers abroad and thereby smoothing the way for the corporations to export our jobs to cheap labor havens. The residue of McCarthyite anti-communism also divides the opposition and retards the ultimate ability of our dynamic and proud union movement to take control of union foreign affairs. With a new genuine internationalism, our unions will reflect the needs of the members. We will, in the not too distant future, join the ranks of unions of all other nations in the quest for a world free of exploitation, unemployment, and finally from the threat of nuclear war. This embodies so much of who Fred is. But, you know, I also want to, Fred told me many stories about his life. And he told me in particular a story about the Peekskill riots in 1949. And Fred was a part of that. He couldn't have been more than 15 or 16 at the time, but Fred was part of this thing where basically there was a peace concert going on that Paul Robeson was going to be a part of. And he had done a couple of concerts and everything went fine, but then he was misquoted in the press about something, and there was a lot of people, particularly veterans, that were going to protest an upcoming fundraising concert, and it turned violent. There was people that were beaten with bats and rocks, and when Paul Robeson showed up, he couldn't perform. He tried to perform, but he couldn't perform, and the cops weren't any help. But it was decided by a committee of labor people, socialist people, communist people, a lot of different activists, to hold the concert a week or so later. And Fred was a part of that. Fred was one of the people that circled the perimeter of the property where the concert was to be held at, and held back the people that wanted to cause harm. Fred Hirsch. And I don't know, Gene, I don't know how much time I have. I don't know if I can do a song now or if I can do it later. But with that, you know, Paul Robeson said so many different things that remind me of Fred. But one of the basic things about Paul Robeson was that he was a man of peace. And, you know, Fred, being a mechanic and an organizer, above all else, was a man of peace, of compassion, and a man with a moral compass that was true north. I love him very much, and I will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you. Sal, you can play your song now if you'd like to.
Will anybody else speak?
Yeah, we have a couple more speakers. You want to do it after?
Yeah, if I can wait, yeah.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, please.
Our next speaker is David Bacon.
Well, it's an honor for me to speak for Fred, talk about Fred this morning. And I wanted to say a little bit about Fred's courage, maybe starting where Sal left off here. Fred and Ginny became political activists and communists in the 50s. And their baptism of fire came when they helped Paul Robeson sing in Peekskill, defying the local fascists of that day and the sheriffs, and then stood shoulder to shoulder with New York's left-wing unionists, including my dad, to stop the rocks and the violence against those who came to hear Robeson sing. They must have been afraid, but they didn't let fear rule their lives. Fred was not a violent man, but he was physically courageous. It took courage to take a petition into his first union meetings in New York City, calling the Korean War wrong, or for peace with the Soviet Union. He called for opening the union stores to Black workers, and the locals' leaders told him plainly that once he passed his apprenticeship, they wanted him out. Fred and Ginny came west here, fleeing the blacklist. In the same year, my father left New York City for the same reason, both families looking for work and a place where the kids could grow up. And Fred and Ginny and the family found San Jose, and my family found Oakland. Fred loved his union and his labor movement, but it wasn't a sentimental kind of love. He believed that people in unions could change, and he was right. In good part because of his persistence over the years and the respect he earned as a worker and a defender of workers. Plumbers Union Local 393 opposed the endless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and called for the rights of immigrant workers when that idea was anathema to a lot of other people. It was in good part because Fred believed that unions could change that he and Ginny went to Delano and stayed during the early years of the grape strike. And Fred explained his hopes this way. He said, farm workers in their hundreds of thousands could potentially provide a model of workers' power that could lead organized labor into a new and militant era. Transforming the labor movement was Fred's ever-present idea. And sometimes it meant organizing a trip with other unionists to show support for newspaper strikers in Detroit, my union. Sometimes it meant going to Colombia to expose US support for a murderous government and paramilitaries out to destroy the union for oil workers. And sometimes it meant just showing up at a farm worker boycott picket line in front of Safeway in his VW van full of copies of the People's World. It took courage to take legal papers into the fields in the first years of the Delano grape strike, knowing that Scabs and Foreman would likely try to beat him up, and they did. After he stumbled out of the rows, Caesar had him stay put while he went to phone the newspapers to expose the brutality of the growers. It took courage when Fred became enraged, when leaders of his own labor movement, as Sal was reading there, helped overthrow the socialist government of Salvador Allende in Chile. And Fred wrote one of the most damning exposés to the AFL-CIO's international department, an analysis of our AFL-CIO role in Latin America or under the covers with the CIA. Whether it was in the plumbers or the UFW, Fred didn't hide his politics. Fred was always Red Fred. But he knew that winning the immediate fight for workers was the first order of the day. And of course, Fred didn't keep his beliefs just to himself. He acted. He and Sophie and Gil Mendoza organized against the police. It took courage to ride behind the police with cameras and law books as the Panthers were doing in Oakland. And fighting police brutality was inseparable from fighting against the Vietnam War. As Dr. King said, the bombs dropped over Vietnam were exploding in American cities. When Angela Davis was put on trial in San Jose for teaching the same ideas that Fred believed in, Fred and Ginny were part of the defense effort, Ginny especially pioneering the jury selection strategy that helped free Angela. By settling in San Jose, Fred became part of a community where Mexicanos, Salvadoreños, Chilenos, Filipinos, and others already had a long history fighting the migra and deportations. Together with Mike Garcia and a brother from the Carpenters, whose name I don't remember now, we became the Labor Committee of People United for Human Rights, and we fought raids and firings at Levi's, Electron, and other factories in the Valley. When many in labor thought that undocumented workers wouldn't and shouldn't organize, Fred brought his union and the Labor Council into support of radical proposals to change US immigration law. And I think Fred would be happy to hear what President Biden did on his first day in office. But Fred will be the first one to say that this is just the beginning and we have a long fight ahead, not just to repair Trump's damage, but for real justice. So what does all this tell us about what Fred believed? You know, we honor Fred for the countless hours that he spent doing the day-to-day work any struggle needs to survive and win. But Fred wanted working people to understand the system too. Fred hated capitalism and he wanted liberation. Fred believed that socialism was the alternative, and after being red-baited for saying so, I think Fred was vindicated in the last few years to see so many young people today reaching that same conclusion. But Fred was never a voice in the wilderness, speaking out just by himself. He saw a common interest between immigrants and native-born, between workers of color and white workers, between unions in the US and those around the world, and he never stopped trying to explain that class gave all of us something in common. All of us absorbed Fred's ideas. Virginia Rodriguez, the daughter of farm workers and a lifetime labor organizer like Fred, said the same thing. She said, there will always be those individuals who will respond to the outer edges of what needs to be done and who will step forward to take up responsibility for what is called for if change is to take place. And if enough of us carry out a piece of what needs to be done, then change will most certainly come. And that certainly describes Fred. Fred, I loved you. Fred Hirsch, presente.
Bravo, bravo.
David, thank you so much. Some folks have asked questions about links and stories and readings. We've added a tab to the South Bay Labor Council webpage, so we'll make sure that there's a space where folks can share all these stories and ideas and visit them later. I'm looking to see if Local 6 is back on. Manuel, are you there?
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We're getting a redo, folks, since the sound was off. So here we go.
My key. Okay, just give us a few seconds. Okay. We're on. Just leave the water. We're on. Okay. Ready? Check the keyboard. Is the keyboard on? Hold the Bible. Okay, little technicality here. Transit. Is the keyboard on? Yeah. Okay, I guess we're having a little technical difficulty here.
We can come back if that's easier.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do that. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Diana, if you would be able to prepare the video. I want to thank Poncho Guevara, who is also a friend of Fred and a friend of many of ours, who helped with the program and who helped put together what you're about to see, which is a summary of a video that we were able to record of Fred a few years ago. I believe it was 2016 at the 393 Union Hall. And so he had some Union brothers and sisters ask him questions, and we've put together a compilation of those stories. So thank you so much.
I was born in Beth Israel Hospital on 2nd Avenue in New York. I have one memory of participating in the May Day parade in New York City on my father's shoulders when I might have been 4 or 5 years old. There was a high level of anti-Semitism at the time. During the war, I guess it was about 1945. So it meant a daily passage on the way home when I'd be attacked by kids who were taught to hate Jews. And I usually fought back effectively, but I often came home with a lot of bruises. I think that with the attitude that I developed around that issue and other issues, and people I knew, kids I knew, and some adults that I knew, I developed a strong feeling against racism. And that meant getting into other fights in the community, but it also meant later on participating in organizations that fought against racism and fought toward the democracy people think we believe in, but don't experience. I think when I was a teenager, I read about the history of the labor movement, and I had at least one particular hero who I read about and then later met. That was Harry Bridges of the Longshore Union. But it was reading about the participation of the force of organized labor during the 1930s that probably inspired me more than other things. Because I came to know the labor movement by reading. And when I came to become a member of my first union, Local 457, I think, in Long Island, I think I had to look at the union and see that it didn't match up to the union movement that I'd read about and dreamed about. And so I did the best I could to make a living and make change. We came to California because work was reducing in my area, which was Nassau County. And we thought we'd have a better future here. I think that the labor movement today still has to organize as it has done in the past and better in a new environment of new tools and sort of continue an historic river of organizing power. After some work that we did around helping to organize in San Jose presentations about the new Farm Workers Union, our family moved to Delano and took some time off from Local 393, continued paying minimal dues, and worked directly with the Farm Workers Union. We were doing something having to do with affecting the grapes on the various trains that were coming down from the north. And the authorities kept on insisting that was something called sabotage, but we were just trying to ruin the grapes because they were harder to sell once they were affected. I can't think of any individual issue, but I think of those conventions, each one of them was the best victory for me personally was getting out of them alive. I would give tips to say that we've got to think of ourselves as part of an organization and help build our organization so that it serves all of our members and our families and functions as part of a strong labor movement, which does the same, which aims to do the same, and which fights to do the same for all working people, members and non-members, people who are struggling to survive in this society. My secret is, if there's any secret to it, is that as powerful as we can organize for wages and conditions on the job in our own work or in any industry, the best we can do to get representation for working people through the democratic process is the best we can do beyond our own small part of the movement that we're in. We've got to have a look at this, at our movement from our local perspective, from our national perspective, and for winning the peace in a world that is good for working people. I've been so lucky in my life to be associated with my wife, Virginia, and with Marcia Bertholf, the wonderful woman who does so much for me today. I'm certain that Local 393 has changed through the years to become a more progressive union than it was when I got here. And that's something I'm proud of. I'm most proud of my 3 daughters. I'm most proud of the members of my local union. And I'm most proud of Marcia Bertholf. And I think I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world.
I don't know if the volume is loud enough.
Thank you so much. We're the luckiest people in the world for knowing Fred. And let's see if we're, I think, ready for some live music.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Ready? Not yet. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1. De colores se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores son los pajaritos que vienen de afuera. De colores es el arco iris que damos lucir. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Eso. Canta el gallo con el kiri, 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 kiri. La gallina con el cara, 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 cara. Los pollitos con el pío, 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 pío. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y por eso los grandes amores de muchos colores me gustan a mí. Eso.
Thank you
Hope
so
you heard
much.
it this time.
We did, and it was beautiful. Thank you so much, Local 6. So before we move on to the next part of the program, which is really the opportunity for all of you to share, I wanted to see if Sal Ventura is here to play a song. Can you hear me, Sal? So I think what we'll do is we're going to have Steve Preminger, who many of you know, who is a leader in our community and a friend of Fred, who's going to help us have an organized but organic conversation in a Zoom room with a lot of people who want to talk and share. So what we'd like to ask is if you want to say something about Fred, and I see Sal, I'll call on you in just a minute. If you'd like to share something about Fred, we're going to use the feature in the chat box to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And Steve will call on you and we'll help him create some order there. But before we move on to that part of the program, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's been able to join us this morning. The family and friends and community that Fred has touched is innumerable, and he is a supernova to me, right? He lives in a planet that I can only dream of sometime visiting. And I think it's one that we always want to aspire to. And Fred called on us in that video to create a historic river of organizing. And I think this is the moment for us to continue doing that work. And we are going to hear from Sal Ventura, and then we will hear from all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jean. And I apologize. An emotional day for me. If you notice the background, that's Paul Robeson there speaking with the singing actually in 1942 with the Moore Dock Workers, and which is in Oakland, California. And for those of you who are business agents or negotiated contracts or did any organizing, you know about the More Dock Workers Doctrine, which basically has, in 1950, it deals with secondary boycotts. The More Dry Dock decision was pretty significant for labor. And this is actually 1942 when Paul Robeson supporting their strike on the docks there. Fred, being a writer, I met him many times, including a writer, wrote an article for the Black Radical Congress News in 1999. And I'll read 2 paragraphs from it. Paul Robeson was a musical artist, orator, renowned actor, student of languages, and a scholar of African culture and the World Wide Web of influence that grew from those roots. Did Fred use the term World Wide Web for everybody else? I'm not sure. But he drew his strength from being a worker and a man of struggle, and that's what he was. He told the UAW in 1947, "I have always put my faith and confidence in the working people in all countries and of all colors. I truly believe that they constitute the greatest force in the world for the advancement of all people." And then Fred continues on, but finishes it by talking about Paul Robeson and the song he's best known for, which is Joe Hill. And for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, but Joe Hill was an organizer with the IWW, the International Workers of the World. And in 1915, a five-man firing squad killed Joe Hill at the Utah State Penitentiary. He was accused of something, and the song that Alfred Hayes wrote in 1938, along with Earl Robinson, talks about that and how he was framed. One of the last things that Joe Hill said the day before he passed away was this: "Tomorrow I expect to take a trip to the planet Mars, and if so, we'll immediately commence to organize the Mars Canal workers into the IWW, and we will sing the good old song so loud that the learned stargazers will once and for all get positive proof that the planet Mars is really inhabited. I have nothing to say for myself, only that I have always tried to make this Earth a little bit better." I see those words and I think of Fred. And so I thought it was appropriate to sing Joe Hill. I don't know if Jimmy Kelly's on this or not. I know David Burrows is, but if I break down, boys, could you kind of chime in for me? But the last 2 verses are going to be about Fred. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake, Joe, by God, says I, and standing by my bed, they framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead, says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe, they shot you, Joe, says I. It takes more guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die, says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, but they can never kill. Went on to organize, went on to organize. Fred Hirsch ain't dead, he says to me. Fred Hirsch ain't never died. Where working men are out on strike, Fred Hirsch is at their side. Fred Hirsch is at their side. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where working folks Hollow Hill, and it's where you'll find Fred. Love you, brother.
Thank you so much, Sal. I'm going to invite Steve Preminger to say a few words.
Thank you, Jean. And before we start talking about Fred, I just want to point out, Jean said she met Fred 30 years ago on a picket line. Jean was 10 years old then, in all seriousness. And how many of us come from labor families where our children were involved from the very beginning, and it becomes a generational thing. And I think that's more important now than ever. When I met Fred, Emerson Street was the business manager of the South Bay Labor Council. Of course, it wasn't called that then, but there was still a lot of progressivism amongst the locals. And, you know, as Cindy mentioned, there was change, you know, Bob Duffy, then Lloyd Williams, his transition with 393, then Bill Guthrie and others that we're going to perhaps hear from because our hands are up now. I remember Fred coming to those early meetings, coming over from Santa Cruz on the aforementioned Vespa. Who would ride a Vespa over Highway 17? Fred Hirsch. Fred was somebody who partnered well with Jenny. I remember when Reagan took out the air traffic controllers on August 3rd, 1981, and we were picketing at the San Francisco airport. All of us, you know, were loud and unruly and making trouble. And then we saw this car circling the arrivals gate. The car was driven by a very well-dressed, prim and proper, attractive lady who seemed to have car trouble when she got right in front of us. And the police came up to her and she went, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the problem is. And then they said, okay, ma'am, we'll move on. She moved on, and then a couple of laps later, her car broke down again at that exact same spot. Of course, that was Jenny and tag teaming with Fred and all the rest of us. So the other thing I wanted to mention, we had talked about who's going to write the Fred Hirsch story. And I think there's been a lot of great comments made today, but Sasha, I think, you know, you really have a good head start on that. So I hope that we can compile all the comments that we've heard and put something out for future generations. And I think on the cover of it, there was Fred Hirsch, and then there was his beanie, which is living now on Marcia's head. And so let's make sure that continues on too. In terms of what we want to do next, there's 165 people on the call. I'm hoping that we're not going to have hands up from everybody. We have hands up from a few of you. So let's see if we can get in a couple of minutes each. And I am going to let you know when you've hit your 2 minutes as nicely as I can. But we want to hear from everybody, maybe starting with Ward LaParle.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Steve. I get to be first, huh, of this group. Well, hey, so much can be said about Fred, and it's so much is being said here, but, you know, it's making me think of what a real extraordinary person that he is. And we're so lucky to have had him with us for so long, 60 years. It's amazing, with Local 393. And where would we be if we didn't have Fred? It's unthinkable. And it makes me also think of how many other people that he's inspired. I'm just one who was just inspired from the moment I met him. And to be brief, I'll just share a quick story with that. You know, I was an apprentice, and I was wearing an army jacket in line on the way to work. And Fred came up to me and he said, "What are you wearing that jacket for?" You know, are you in the military? No, it's cold, Fred. You know, I had this. And he said, well, you know, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And when you're standing in line here, you know, I'm looking at you and I'm already mad. And that was just led into the introduction with Fred. It was so great to work with him. Not enough has been said about him as a mechanic. You know, he was a great plumber and he really inspired people to do good work. I was so lucky to be able to work with him. He worked hard. He was a hard worker every day. He would chastise people if they weren't working or if they weren't doing their job. And he tried to make sure that the production that he did was always increased. And then break time, you know, we would sit around and he would tell us about stewards. He would tell us the importance of, you know, the interaction with the union. And I'll also briefly just say, I was so lucky and privileged to have been there to see the turnaround of the relationship that Fred had with his own union. When I first started as an apprentice and going to union meetings, seeing Fred, there was so much courage. He was such an amazing man that would say whatever needed to be said to push his agenda and the agenda that needed to be pushed forward. And many times he was threatened or he would never leave. You couldn't get him to leave. You'd have to throw him out, and he was thrown out. But, you know, by the time it came full circle, he had showed what an amazing transition that was made with the local and the people that dealt with him. He was much accepted and led the fight that still is going on and will always be going on. So we were just so lucky to have Fred, so privileged to have him. And I know he's inspired many more that will be like him, but I don't know if anyone can ever live up to that legend. But we're just lucky to have him. And thank you, Fred's family, for sharing him with us. And with that, we'll always love him and miss him. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ward. I'd like to call on Eliseo Medina.
Hey, Ward.
You're on mute.
Brother Eliseo. Looks like you're muted still.
Okay, I hope you can hear me now. First of all, let me start by thanking the South Bay Labor Council for organizing this wonderful event to commemorate and celebrate Fred's life. And, you know, in listening to all of you talk today, it reminded me of a speech made by Dr. Martin Luther King. It was called the Drum Major Instinct. And it talked about a human instinct to want to stand out, to be recognized, and to be leading the parade. And Martin Luther King said that the good news is that we all can be great because we can all serve. And I think from listening to everyone's comments today, very clear that Fred certainly served this country, our community, and our labor movement, from fighting to end unjust wars, to building the union, to defending immigrants, to defending the rights of working people and the citizens of this country. Fred served. His was a life of service. And even to his last days that I remember when he called Liza to find out when his union meeting was and whether his union dues were paid up. I think we can all agree that Fred paid his dues. So thank you, Fred, for sharing your life with us. Thank all of you for being his friends and helping him be who he was. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Eliseo. I'd like to call on Brother Ron Lind.
So I first met Fred back in 1979 or 1980, shortly after I was hired as an organizer with what was then the Retail Clerks Union, Local 428. Maybe a few of you remember that. The union president, my boss, told me I needed to meet with a particular guy who would, quote, help me get involved in community issues that our union supports. Turned out that my boss and Fred were, shall we say, the same political persuasion. So Fred began to talk to me about pending community issues like the US role in El Salvador, apartheid, the AFL-CIO's American Institute for Free Labor Development, and so on. So at Fred's prodding, with my union president's ongoing encouragement, I was soon spending occasional evenings and meetings and various events. I also found myself taking a side, Fred's side, in various heated debates at Central Labor Council meetings. At some point, still around 1980 something, I was invited to dinner with Fred and his wife Jenny before attending a meeting that had been put together to form the local branch of the Community in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. I think there's a few alumni here on the call, El Comité. I soon found out that thanks to Fred, I was not only going to be a member of the committee, I was going to chair the committee meetings. So at some point, there was a major controversy in our little group that resulted in a special call meeting. It was a barn burner. It turns out that one of our members allegedly spoke to an FBI agent about our committee, or maybe even members of the committee. And man, brother Fred, he was on fire, demanding this guy be expelled. And of course, if you read the book that Sal talked about, you'll see that Fred had some experience with the FBI over the years. So here I am, not far removed from stocking grocery store shelves and working my way through college, chairing a crazy, contentious meeting starring Fred Hirsch. Throughout this heated debate, Fred kept rising with this, and a lot of you have seen this, with his famous pointed finger, shouting, "Point of order," or more often, "point of personal privilege." He was really dominating the meeting. So this went on for a while until I finally said, "Fred, you're out of order, brother. You need to sit down," or something like that. And Fred smiled and sat down, obviously somewhat pleased that his protege had some balls. So decades later, I continued to have to deal with that occasional finger when I was chairing Central Labor Council meetings, and Fred would sit right in the front row, about 5 feet from me, up at the front desk there. And the more contentious the meeting, the more likely Fred's finger was to go up to make a point. I got plenty of other Fred stories. I know we don't have a lot of time, including one about his insistence that I celebrate my daughter Julie's birthday every year by helping him organize a May Day event in San Jose. But let me just finish by saying that, during my 40-year career working in the labor movement, Fred was a friend, he was a mentor, he was an inspiration, and he was kind of like Jiminy Cricket to my Pinocchio. Gonna miss you, Fred. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Ron. I'd like to call on Nora Campos or Neil Struthers.
Well,
No, no.
actually, both of us are here. Thank you, Steve. First of all, we want to thank the family for sharing Fred with our community. And I was listening to the stories of the family sharing about the boldness of Fred and the courage and the upbringing, that the scenario that they had when they were being raised by an amazing individual. I was reminded of a story that Fred shared with me when I and my brother came into our own in our movement for civil rights within this valley. Fred said to me, "You're Eloy's daughter." And I said, "I am." And he said, "Your father and I were friends and we did great things together." And I remember that because I was on the other end thinking in my head, knowing that my father was part of Model Cities. My father was part of the farm worker movement and organizing with Cesar Chavez. So I knew that the work that my father had done alongside with all his fellow colleagues in the movement was work that now I was going to be able to share with some of the people my dad organized with. And I remember thinking, because I had heard stories about Fred, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, is he gonna tell me something? You're not doing this right, or you're not doing that right. And I remember him thinking that he's probably wondering what type of leader I'm going to be. And from that day on, I knew that Fred was okay with the way I was leading, because every time I saw him in public, whether it was at the Labor Council or outside or on a picket line, he would give me the biggest hug. And that was the warmth that I always got from Fred, and a smile. And when we saw each other, we both would gravitate, like we were the first ones that when I would go to the Labor Council, it was the first one that, it was almost kind of like the Godfather. You would go in and you would see Fred and you would give your respects to him. But to know that Fred was a compassionate, a strong, bold leader, and unapologetic for whatever he said or done for the people that we continue to serve here in Silicon Valley, brought great joy to me. And I'm hoping that my brother will share some other stories that my father shared with us about Fred. But we talk about generational leadership or generational service. It was the work that my father and Fred were a part of that I think is so important for us to continue to move forward on. And I will forever be grateful for the Hirsch family sharing your father, your grandfather with all of us. And he will forever be missed. And I'm thankful that we have this opportunity to fill and feed our souls today with stories of a great man and a great leader.
I want to just add, I had to laugh when Cindy said earlier that Fred forced them, maybe not forced them, but had their own foreign policy. And as a building trades leader at the same time, we had one too. And it took a while before I realized that was uncommon. When I talked to my colleagues across the country, it was clear that this was a unique place. It shouldn't be a surprise given the proximity of Cesar Chavez and other great labor leaders, where they come from. And it's this area here. And I didn't always agree with Fred, but he made sure that I was prepared, and he made me a better leader because of it, because I had to think ahead. What is Fred going to say? Because he was always there. And if you couldn't get it past Fred, you were not going to get it approved. And so he forced leaders like Cindy and I and Phaedra and others to really give it thought, and made us better because of it. And I think we owe a lot to Fred. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Bill Meyer.
Thank you, Steve. Just like to offer my condolences to the Hirsch family and to Marcia. As I missed those days when I was seeing Fred and Marcia sitting, and I was kind of a little nervous. I was in the field of Local 393 for 19 years. I would rub elbows with Fred out in the field, but then I really got to rub elbows when I was a business manager from 2005 to 2014. And I always remember times when I would walk into some of the functions a little nervous, and I would see Fred and Marcia there, and somehow it would always bring a little bit of calmness to me. And like I say, I had 19 years in the field, but the last 9, I guess I caught Fred at probably one of the best times, because Fred, echoing what Neil had just mentioned, was a force to be reckoned with. But I caught him in that, I dare not say twilight, because he's a force even today in all of our hearts and souls, but he really would sit down with me and he would enlighten me on many issues. And he did so much for Local 393. I'll always be forever grateful. One thing Fred has always imparted within me, if all of us just took 10% of the passion and effort and desire that Fred had, forget about whether you agree or disagree with him. If we took 10% of what he had, and every one of us did that, this world would be such a better place. And thankful to Fred and all of my brothers and sisters I'm happy to see here today. As a result of all, I'm a better man today, enjoying my retirement, but work's never done. So thank you, Steve, and thank you to the family, and my condolences to all.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for your brief comments. Louis?
Yeah, thank you, brother. My condolences, abrazo fuerte to the family, and Marcia, to all of you, the friends too. A couple quick stories. Just I met Fred in the 80s at the Comité, and he broke down the CIA and the A-field connection with CWA, my union communication workers. So I got right to work. I'm a old lefty, or a young lefty, as Fred would say, but I put it to practice because of the image he shared with us, that it was an honor and a privilege to be in our positions. If you're going to be a working person that was going to be active, then you were obligated to help our class. So with consulting with Fred, working with Fred often to pass the resolutions, he would call late at night. He would call all hours of the day with his really incredible writings. And I would tell him, Fred, you work all day. How in the hell do you do this? And he goes, man, it's what we got to do. So he got me to, at CWA, we passed a resolution to oppose the war in Iraq. We passed a resolution to end the blockade Cuba and Florida. We raised the Mumia Abu Jamal resolution in Pennsylvania, and on and on and on. The time when I was in leadership in our union, Fred was my mentor, my brother, my confidant. And I would always tell him as a Chicano, when I grow up, Fred, I want to be like you, brother. And the other thing I miss with Fred, because of politics, I never have been a Democrat, never would be a Democrat, sure as hell would never be a Republican, because I'm a leftist at heart. I only marry Democrats, but Fred would always tell me, hey, this is a popular front fight. We got to fight the fascists. And that's why I'm involved with the Democrats, because if we don't fight these damn fascists, they're going to take over our country and it's going to get worse. So with that, all of you that don't know that, that's what drove Fred, kept him involved in the Democratic Party politics, even after they transitioned from their races and all that horrible past. But last words Fred told me was, hey, has someone told you they love you today? Because he was a compassionate brother, an incredible comrade. I'm going to miss him dearly. And he lives on in all of us as long as we keep the fight going. So, si se puede.
Thank you, Louis. Tony.
Thank you, Steve. Just a few things about my political and personal godfather. It's great hearing all the stories. And I always remember not just that he was so committed and worked so hard for the people, but that he was really funny. I enjoyed myself many hours that I spent with Fred. We won so many picket lines, I can't remember how many. I met Fred when I was in high school in 1966. I was 16 years old. He came to my house because he was organizing on the east side, the San Cipuedes. And from that time until he passed, we were great friends, and he was a tremendous mentor to me. And I recall meeting in his green Volkswagen van when we had the first meetings of the Community Alert Patrol, and we were organizing it from that van. And then later, I remember that we worked on trying to put together a police review board. And as we were drafting the bill that we were going to petition, I recall we were forming it, and we said, well, the city council will appoint the members. And then we realized the city council is going to appoint the members. That means the POA is going to appoint the members. So then we realized what we really needed to do was to district the city council. So we tried to put that on the ballot. We were very close, long story short, but then years later, we finally got districting. And during the time in between, we had the experience of investigating about 1,000 prospective jurors for Angela Davis's trial. I spent an awful lot of time, I think for a couple of years there, I had dinner every night at Liza's house because we were always working. Yeah, we were students, but we were always very active. And I wanted to let the family know that Jaime Gallardo and Am Morales are also on here. We were all students during that time. We worked together on CAP and so on. So we go back all the way to the 60s when Fred did a tremendous amount of community organizing there on the East Side. That's where we know him from. Certainly we know him through labor, but also we remember all the community action that he was part of. And lastly, I just wanted to mention how funny he really was. I enjoyed myself tremendously working with Fred. He worked us really hard. We did everything we could, but he was really funny. And when Liza was talking, all I did was just laugh because I remember his humor. It was just tremendous. Anyway, good luck, Fred. I know you're on the other side with your friends and the rest of your family. And soon, when our time comes, we'll see you then. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tony. Tony.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to the family for allowing all this to go ahead and happen, and the South Bay Labor Council. I'm just going to tell a real quick one. On my video, one of the things that I just wanted to really mention is that one, Fred knew me before I was born, and you know, a lot of people say, "Oh, we've known Fred for 30 or 40 years." Fred came in to San Jose. He stayed with the Good Brothers back in '56. So I gave my dad a call and asked him. I said, "So, Dad, you were part of the Good Brothers house, and the Good Brothers were San Jose State students that weren't allowed to stay in housing when they went to college there in San Jose. So they and they were African American students that were there. And so one of the things that happened was that they had a house on Fifth Street, Fifth and St. John. And so my dad said, all of a sudden, this knock on the door, and this white guy came in and said, "Hey, my name is Fred Hirsch. I need a place to stay." And so they welcomed him in, and they said, you know, "Come on in, brother." And then they go, "Hey, this guy's bringing up some crazy things. He's trying to help workers and help ourselves." And it was a great thing. So when I met Fred, Fred said, "I've known you since you were this big." And I'm going, "Okay." And he goes, "You better make sure you do the right thing, because I know you're a dad. You're going to make sure that all happens." So Fred has been doing things since the 50s. My dad mentioned that he also was trying to integrate the plumbers union back in the 50s while they were doing all those types of things. So Fred, right on to all the things that you were going out there doing. And my dad said hello. And some of the Good Brothers that he stayed with Melvin Newton and Bobby Pointer. And Melvin Newton's brother was Huey, part of the Black Panthers. So I know that all those guys back then, those OGs, I call them the old gangsters, knew what they were doing. They all talked together, and they made sure that all of us knew that we had to go out there and do the right thing. So thank you, Fred. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Colin.
Hello, everyone. It's going to be hard to follow that all, but I'm going to try. So I wasn't born up here. I've only been living up here for about 7 or 8 years. So I don't have, the grand histories that you all have with Fred, but in the time that I've been here and all the time that I've been working partnerships and the labor unions, every time there was an event, Fred was there. It didn't matter what it was. A phone bank for an election, Fred was there. Recycling march, Fred was there. Fred was always this presence there, and he was always very kind and very, welcoming to me, and I appreciate that because I'm probably one of the younger people on this stream or Zoom, and I, it's gonna be tough because, and it's also very conflicting for me because a world without Fred Hirsch is a far bleaker one. But if anyone has earned some rest, it's Fred. I mean, even just sitting here and listening to all of you, he's been fighting nonstop. And it's kind of, I see a lot of, my dad in him. And all I have to say is that, if I'm just glad that if he had to go, he got to see a tyrant get voted out of the White House before he did. And Fred, wherever you are, thank you for everything.
Thank you, Colin. Now for one of the other youngins on the call, Michael.
So I've known Fred, I guess it probably goes back 50 years that, I originally met Fred when I was a young organizer at Local 715, SEIU Local 715, kind of a contrarian in the labor movement and in the Labor Council. And Fred was always supportive of me and always had always gave time to try to help me and help me understand what was going on at that time in the labor movement. I want to say that a couple of the comments that are made about the foreign policy, that we had our own foreign policy in the Santa Clara Labor Council, and something that I'll always remember I just never forget was, on the pamphlet he wrote that exposed A-Field and what they were doing, and the most exciting, and this never happened very often, most exciting Labor Council meeting that I ever went to was when, after he wrote his pamphlet and sent it all over the country, the AFL-CIO was forced to send the head of A-Field. I can't remember the guy's name anymore. That's what happens when you get old, but forced him to come to our Labor Council meeting and defend the AFL-CIO's policies on, and the A-Field organization at a Labor Council meeting. And it was, this guy probably won't forget it. He's probably dead now, but he will never forget us yelling at him, screaming at him for using our dues for that stuff. And it was all, Fred's momentum that caused that to happen. And it's just something that I will always remember. The other thing was, my father-in-law, Eliseo Robledo, was a member of 393, was a plumber. And it amazed me when I came into the family and found out that Fred Hirsch was a friend of his and had been recruiting him to go to, to go to phone banks and work on political campaigns, and something that I hadn't seen in my father-in-law. But this connection with Fred was always amazing to me. And Fred would always ask me about my father-in-law whenever I saw him. He was really something, just a great person. And everybody said it, I can't say more, about the special human being he was and the impact he had on everybody who ever knew him, good or bad. He always, he kept you honest, and he was just a wonderful person. And I want to also send my condolences to the family and say hi to Liza and Eliseo and everybody else on this call. It would be wonderful if we could all be doing this together and hugging, but best to everybody. Thank you, Steve.
Well, let's not forget that Fred doesn't believe in Zoom, so I don't know how we were able to pull this off, but I know the goal will be to do something live. Maybe we'll hear more about that. Aram.
You're on mute, Aram.
There you go.
I'm a plumber but I've known Fred much longer than that. I met Fred during the right after the coup in Chile and La Peña in Berkeley. So I've known Fred both as a political activist and as a plumber. I've got to say, Fred is one of the bravest people I've ever worked with. I'm a union member. Fred was a communist trade unionist, member of Plumbers and Steamfitters 393, and he was viciously red baited at times in there, and he stood up to it. He persevered and believed that organizing workers through trade unions was the strongest way to get change, not only in their day-to-day life, but in our society. And I believe that too. And that's why I'm a trade union member. He persevered in spite of the red baiting in 393. And I knew, go back to Bob Duffy. I had so many of the managers. He was probably back in the late 80s. And in spite of the red baiting and the attacks he was under, he was regularly reelected as an officer of that local. So it indicates that the members understood his commitment to them and to trade union democracy, and to having a stronger union. Fred was key to transforming Plumbers and Steamfitters 393, and I hold that local in the highest esteem. He worked with Lloyd Williams, who was the business manager after Bob Duffy, and he really transformed Lloyd, who was a good friend of mine. I knew him well, and he really transformed Lloyd. So that local now is known, I think, in the United Association, which is the name for the Plumbers Union, is a local that has much larger interests than simple trade unionism. They are concerned about society and social change. He was a model and a mentor to me, a loyal friend, and with a lot of warmth and good humor. And I will miss Fred. And I want to offer my condolences to the family and to Marcia. So thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. I saw Peter Cervantes Gauchi.
I think probably most of what I was going to say, somebody else said, but briefly, I knew I was with the Labor Council in the early '80s, and as Aaron had said, at that time, Bob Duffy was the head of the Plumbers Local, and Fred was very visible and red baited pretty consistently. And because of, like, I guess, Duffy and whatever the political winds were at the time, the Plumbers Local was not a progressive union at that time. In fact, it was the opposite of that, and thorn in the side of a lot of the progressives who were trying to make good things happen in the Labor Council. And fortunately, they weren't that big, so we could do some good things. But about a decade or so after I left the council, I was coming through and I visited, and I had a conversation with Ginny Hirsch. She said that you wouldn't believe it around here now, but how it's changed. Fred's really appreciated by his local. So you're kidding. And it's named all these people and how he was honored and how he had so much, he'd always been respected by everybody, but he actually were convincing them to go do more good things. And they were actually part of the critical mass in the council that made a hell of a lot more good things happen. So the earlier speaker, the younger speaker, I think, who said that the world is grim without Fred, the world was grim when Fred was with us, and he just didn't give up. And some real change happened as a result of the fact that he never gave up and influenced us all. So the world is blessed because of Fred, as are we all. And I think it's a testament that everybody who's younger than us should remember, just don't give up. Fred did. And that's why we're all here, because we appreciated him. So I won't say more. And my condolences also to the family and all the closer friends. And I appreciate having been invited to come on the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Javier.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, would like to extend our condolences from the Campos family to the Hirsch family. And my comments will be short. And I want to share a story of the first time I met Fred. So I met Fred in 2000 at the Labor Council. I was working on Manny Diaz's assembly race, and I was at the Labor Council to run a phone bank and recruit voters or recruit callers from there to phone bank for Manny. I had my name tag on, and Fred comes to me. You know how Fred does. You know, he walks around and he'll talk to everyone. So he comes to me and he asks me, "Would you happen to be Eloy from the UAW son?" And I said, "Yeah, that's my dad." And he said, you and your dad and I and Willie Regalado, we used to raise hell together way back in the day in the 70s and you know and so forth." And he said, "You know, tell your dad I said hello." I said, "Okay." So the next day I talked to my dad and I said, "Dad, I met a man named Fred Hirsch at the Labor Council, and he said he knows you and that you guys used to raise hell back in the day, and you're organizing with the UAW and with the farm workers." And he said, yeah, I know Fred. Yeah, he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "We did some things together, you know, but all good, all for the movement." And then he said, "You know what? Next time you see Fred, ask him if he still has his communist card." I said, "Okay." So then, you know, that night I go back to the Labor Council for the phone bank, and I see Fred, and I said, "Hey, Fred, my dad said hello." You know, he shared with me all the things you guys used to do. And he asked me to ask you if you still have your communist card. And then Fred, with the grin that he always has, looks at me, reaches into his pocket, pulls out his wallet, and pulls out the card. And that was Fred, you know, and again, you know, Fred was stalwart. Fred just, he was tenacious, didn't give up. And he was one of the hardest fighters I'd ever met. And he was your conscience. You know, and he had no problem, you know, telling you if if you were on the wrong side of an issue. And thank God I never got that talk with Fred. But he will be missed. And to the family, thank you again for sharing him with us.
Thanks, Javier. Ann. Ann Rosenzweig. Maybe we can come back to Ann. Chava.
No, Steve, I already went. Thank you. Give the opportunity to somebody else.
Okay, thanks, brother. I see another Hirsch on the call. Jim.
Hi, Steve. I'm Jim Hirsch. I'm one of those people that came to dinner and stayed for months. I was a refugee from the UFW. I was a volunteer organizer in the boycott. And when I left in, I think, 76, 74, I was invited to stay at Fred and Ginny's house in San Jose for a while, where I got to know them, had dinner with them, listened to stories, and stayed for quite a while. I remember one time he was talking about the organizing that he was doing for the CAP, and he had addressed the city council, and he recalled that he had addressed them. He said, "A gentleman of the city council, and you, Madam Mayor, who see the world through a gray haze." At that time, Janet Gray Hayes was the mayor, the first woman mayor of a major city. And he thought that was pretty good. And many years later, he was organizing a reception for some legislators from Chile, and he had the mayor at that time host the event at the library on 10th Street. And I remember I was with him, and the mayor came up to him and she said, "Fred," she said, "you really couldn't resist that pun, could you?" And Fred looked her in the eye and he said, "Madam Mayor, that was no pun. That was an insult." And I just thought that was Fred. And what I liked and what I especially enjoyed in that little video was just hearing his laugh, because he took so much joy in what he did, and I'll miss him a great deal. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Good to see you again. Is Ann back on? Ann Rosenzweig?
Okay. That was good.
Okay, Kim.
Okay, thank you. Condolences to the family and especially Marcia. Fred and I didn't live in the South Bay. I lived in the East Bay for a long time. I was over in Oakland, Berkeley, that area. But Fred and I met in San Francisco in an organization called Sister, the Committee in Solidarity, International Solidarity Trade Union Rights, founded by Aubrey Grossman, who I believe was one of Harry Bridges' old lawyers. But we got to know each other, we worked together, and then years later, I ended up leaving the Bay Area to go to grad school. After 15 years of being out of, after my college degree, after my bachelor's degree, I ended up going back to grad school. So I went to temporary duty to the Midwest. Haven't left here since 1993. I'm now living in Indiana. But I hadn't heard about this. Joe Barry shot me an email, and so I was able to get on. So I might be repeating folks. I hope not. But later on, Fred and I fell apart when I moved to the Midwest, and then later we reconnected, and then we worked together very closely as far as the efforts around the AFL-CIO's foreign policy. And Fred played such a magnificent role in California in trying to get the California state AFL-CIO to condemn their foreign policy, which eventually in 2004, he and the others working with him got. The Cal State Fed over 400 delegates unanimously condemned the AFL-CIO foreign policy. And this was a product of Fred's work over the years. And then that was transmitted to the national AFL-CIO leadership for consideration at the 2005 National Convention in Chicago, where I was living at the time. So Fred flew out and stayed with me, and we had a basement in our house, and he was staying down there, and the physical pain that he went through just getting up and down from the basement into the main floor of the house was amazing, because his knees were shot, but he wouldn't give up. He wanted to go on, and he was present throughout this whole debate. And the national leadership eventually changed the California resolution from condemning the national AFL-CIO's foreign policy to one celebrating it. They changed it totally on us. But Fred was right there. He was in on the negotiations, and we worked through this, and then we stayed in touch afterwards. We were very close. And in 2010, I brought out a book called The AFL-CIO's War Against Developing Country Workers, Solidarity or Sabotage. And to honor Fred, I made him one of two people the book was dedicated to. And I pointed out that he taught us to all be internationalistas. And I'll always remember Fred. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Last call for Ann. Not seeing her, I was saving you for last, Jimmy, because I thought, you'll do a rousing song. So looks like Jimmy Kelly will be our last, at least with his Zoom effort. But once this goddamn pandemic is over, over with, we're gonna all get together, and all of you from out of town are gonna have to fly in or drive in. I don't know where we're gonna do
Or
it, but
both.
we'll get together. We'll see Marcia with Fred's beanie on, and it'll be great. So,
Could I speak
Sasha,
briefly,
get ready
Roger
for the-
Scott?
Pardon?
Could I speak? I tried to indicate that I'd like to speak in the chat. Could I speak briefly, Roger Scott?
Sure, Roger. We'll take this out of Jimmy's song time.
Okay.
Just kidding, Jimmy.
We gotta hurry. Okay, well, wonderful stories about Fred. The first time I met him was at an American Federation of Teachers Commission convention in San Francisco more than 30 years ago. And Fred was leading a charge against the AFEL people, that was very strongly supported by Shanker, the American Federation of Teachers. And he was addressing a kind of rotund fellow named Doherty, who had a beard like Santa Claus, but was long on anti-communist rhetoric. And Fred said to him, "You people who are betraying unions in Latin America are also traitors to the American labor movement. You should recognize that, and we're going to publicize that." Fred was a great spirit, as you all have said, and a militant and persevering and intelligent soldier of the people. He always stood up to the people with power and stood with the powerless, encouraging and organizing them. His life and work, in my view, represent the image or the sentiment of good unions, progressive unions, being the brains and conscience of society. Fred was a great spirit, and I think, and I would urge people to do a documentary of this program or some documentary on Fred's life and a collection of his intelligent, courageous work. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Jimmy, take it away.
Yeah. Well, speaking of intelligence, I hope that somebody gets his FBI file and we can find out who's been following him around. But he had a sense of humor and he was a radical. And so this is a song that's a kind of funny song I thought we'd end up with. So it's about, it's by Elliot Kennan. And it's called Ain't Been Doing Nothing If You Ain't Been Called a Red. And Fred, this is for you. Well, when I was a little boy, I used to love parades with banner bands and red balloons and maybe lemonade. And I came home one May Day, my neighbor's father said, "Those marchers all are commies. Tell me, kid, are you a red?" Well, I didn't know what he meant. My hair back then was brown. My house was plain red brick like many others in the town. So I went and told my daddy that my neighbor called me red. My daddy took me on his knee and this is what he said: "Well, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you marched or agitated, you're bound to hurt," it said. "And you might as well ignore it or love the word instead, because you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red." As I was growing up, I had my troubles, I suppose, when someone took exception to the contours of my nose, or tried to cheat me on the job or hit me on the head. When I organized to fight back then, those suckers called me red. And then after I got married, one apartment that we had, they had a classic rotten landlord, and they tell you he was bad. And when he tried to kick us out, I rubbed my hands and said, "You haven't had a struggle if you haven't fought a red." So I kept on agitating, because what else can you do? Are you gonna get those son of a bitches to take all over you? A friend of mine said, "You'll get fired hanging with that commie mob." I should have had such trouble, buddy. I ain't got a job, 'cause you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called a red. If you marched or agitated, you're bound to hurt, it said. You might as well ignore it or love the word instead, because you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called a red. Well, I've been agitating now for 15 years or more for employment and equality and always against war. I'll keep doing it forever, just as far as I can see. And if that's what being red is, well, that's good enough for me. Well, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called red. If your monster agitated, you're bound to hear it said, and you might as well ignore it and love the word you'd said, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called red. Solidarity forever, cause you ain't been doing nothing if you ain't been called red. Solidarity to the Hirsch family and all our union extended family.
Bravo.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
On behalf of the South Bay Labor Council, thank you so much for joining us today. Fred lives in all of us, and we're going to make sure that this is just the beginning of many opportunities to celebrate Fred, to live and organize as Fred would expect, and to make sure that every day we're fighting for working people. So please stay safe and healthy, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
Gene.
Thanks, Jean. It was great to see
Thanks,
everybody.
Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Solidarity, Marcia.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Connie and Steve.
Thank you. Thanks, Jean.
Everyone, family, thank you.
Thanks, Gene.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, Marcia.
Thank you.
Everyone be well.
Jimmy. Great job, Poncho.
Great job, everybody. Adelante.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait.
Bye, all.
Solidarity forever and one day longer.
Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Hirsch family.
Liza, thank you again.
Gene, if people want DVDs of this program, this inspiring program, I can make 100 if you want to send me the recording of the Zoom. If you need 100 or more DVDs, it's easy for me to make them. So mine is Roger Scott. So if you would like me to do that, let me know and send me a recording of the inspiring program.
Thank you so much, Roger. That's very generous of you, and I'll make sure that we follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Liza. Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you, everyone, so much for making this happen.
It off. Thank you, Jean, for letting me know about this. I appreciate it. God bless all of you.
Thank you, Paul. Take care.
It's too bad we can't go in another room and just keep it going.
If you guys want to stay on here, I can keep the room open. Just won't be
Solidarity lasts
won't be
forever.
facilitated. That's it. You have to facilitate it yourself, but I'll keep it open for a while longer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody.
I wonder if my mom's gonna stay. I should text her. She just said for everybody. Oh.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you.
I really
Jimmy,
appreciate it.
you were great, Jimmy.
Nah, you were great. So was he.
Are we just sharing stories now?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have a favorite memory of Fred? Or any more?
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw him without his cap on, I didn't recognize him.
Well, I'm gonna leave.
At a union meeting, maybe like a year or two ago, which was usually myself, Marcia, Nancy, Sarah, anyway, with a small group of women and a large group made up primarily of men. I always wanted to sit by Fred because he was very welcoming, but he tried to get my attention and I didn't see him and he rapped me with his cane. And I was like, who the F just hit me with the cane at the Union Hall? And I turned around and he was just smiling at me. And I told him he was the only man in the universe that could hit me with a cane and I would smile and still want to sit next to him. But I did. And that just always reminded me of Fred and he liked to stir things up, not only to change the world, but just with the person sitting next to him. And I love that about him.
Oh,
I'd like to ask if anybody who's still here has Cap stories. I didn't know Fred had worked with Cap. Sorry, I'm Ann Hickling and I teach history at De Anza and did an oral history with Fred and Ginny.
oh,
So
good.
that's why I want to ask even more stories.
Hmm.
Yes, should have asked sooner.
I'd like to find out about that oral history. You're muted.
Didn't want to make more noise.
Right.
It's on his memorial page. And I think Ted Smith has put it up in a couple of other places. It's on YouTube. And it's about Peekskill. It's about the riots. Because they didn't even know each other yet when the Peekskill riots happened. But they had both been there. So it's really fun to hear like two completely different stories while you're sitting there with the couple.
I remember Ginny, when we were working on the 226 campaign, she was there every day helping me phone bank. It was one of my first things I did with the Labor Council. And what we would do is, and she said, look, here's what you do. When you get somebody to come in, you tell them that they have to bring the food the next time. We'll pay for it, but they get to pick the menu. So one day we had Chinese, next day we'd have Italian, and all these different people would go to their favorite restaurants and bring food for us for a phone bank. And we had the best phone bank. We called everybody in Santa Cruz County in the course of the 226 campaign. We didn't have a lot of money to do mailings or anything like that or walking, but between the hardcore bunch of us, we called every name on our phone bank.
Nice work. I have a reverse end one. One time Fred was working at a phone bank, obviously, and he called me without paying attention to my name. And he typed into this thing about voting for Gore. And I said, Fred, do I really have to vote for Gore? And he just came out with his United Front stuff. You have to work with what you got. Okay, I'll vote for Gore.
Well, maybe that's it.
Jimmy, did you happen to work on the minimum $15 an hour drive from?
In Santa Cruz?
No, that's right. You're that side of the hill. No, the San Jose can't. Well, either one. But
I did work a little bit.
I had wanted to get more about that from him and didn't get there.
He actually worked on the one in Santa Cruz too. After they did the one in, it wasn't successful, but he had worked on that with my good friend Paul Ortiz, who's a labor historian out of Florida now.
Oh, good.
But he used to be at UCSC.
I wonder if it would be okay. My name is Claudia Rossi, and I've been very quiet out of respect for all of you who knew Fred. I just didn't think it was appropriate for me, such a newcomer, to take up any time from all of you. But one of the things that I remember when I was a little girl and growing up in Colombia, a member of our family died, and I was too little to realize what death was. It's a concept that you have to grow up and be older to really realize. And so somebody in the family told me that as long as people continue to tell your stories after you're gone, you'll never die. And that really, death happens when no one around ever tells your story. And I thought that that was just a beautiful explanation. And I kept thinking of that as I listened to all of you. I know that we're moving to a new building, a new labor temple. And I wonder if there might be just a little corner where people could come in and listen to those stories, kind of like what they do in the Gettysburg and the battlegrounds, where they literally have a tiny little corner and they have two benches and they have like a permanent TV screen, and you literally just plug in and you choose and you listen to those videos of stories. And I don't know if there's space, but it seems to me that we need to hear those stories from all of you, those of us that are newer to the fight, to be inspired and to learn. And we could bring our children and have them listen to those stories to inspire them. Because I think that if we only tell our stories when we're in these memorials, and then they're kind of lost to those of us that are new and need to learn from all of you.
I'm a great fan of saving the stories. That sounds great.
Well, I'll meet with Jean. I have an appointment with her, and it wouldn't take up that much space to have that tiny little corner with a bench or two. And it's a way, and when we can gather again, so our children could visit the labor halls and listen to those stories. I think we could do a lot with them if we had it's like a tiny little corner that could be a museum, and it wouldn't take up that much room. It could be kind of a video archive museum where we can share all of these stories and keep them alive.
Maybe Claudia, you could kind of just keep a list in the back of your head or in some note on your computer about the different categories, the different cycles. I can't find the word I want, but like the work to get through the minimum wage, and like CAP, and just sort of different events, but that's too small of a word. And then when people do get together, if there is an in-person one of these for Fred, or just when there are other labor events, when there's a big birthday party or for somebody in the hall or something like that, people could give, instead of sort of general things, that you could get specifics from something that they were involved in. And that way you could build up a collection of recordings and then take the step of having the place to put them.
That's true. And I think that this could be a good project for some university students that could help us archive. You know, I am a registered nurse and just very busy right now with COVID and vaccines and all of that. Have been burning the candle at both ends. But I think it's really, I was born in Colombia, and when someone talked about just the movement in Latin America and the brutality that we live through in our countries, I have friends from Chile that remember that the brutality there. There's just so much. I felt like today was a combination of going to church and also listening to just a really good lecture in the history of labor. Today was amazing. I logged in at 11, and this is the best Zoom that I've attended ever.
I agree.
Ever. So I'll talk to Jean, and then maybe I'm not connected to too many people at San Jose State, but there's a lot of history. And I think yesterday was Gemma's memorial, and she and I knew each other because I live in Morgan Hill and I served on the board. And so this weekend we heard stories about Gemma, Abel's, and now, I mean, the same weekend back to back.
Yeah.
And I just don't want those stories lost. They're too important.
Fred would agree. I'll dare to speak for him for a second.
Well, it's been an honor. I'm going to log off and have a pile of dirty dishes in the.
Work is never done.
Yeah,
Women's or
right.
anybody.
Yeah, but what an honor! I'm really inspired and grateful. I'll follow up with Jean to see if maybe there might be, and maybe there are a lot of college students that I think could maybe help us out with this archival project.
Good. Excellent.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks for the music. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Solidarity forever and a day longer. One day longer. Oops.